The style Mal played, hard rhythm player. Malcolm was very strong, very confident the way he played. Stevie does the same thing. I mean, we all grew up, we were at the same kind of age group.
Angus Young is a man who breathed life into every heartbeat of rock and roll and managed to keep that fire burning for over half a century. And if you've ever listened to Back in Black, ever seen a small figure duck walking madly across the stage, ever felt your blood boil from the very first guitar note of Thunderstruck, then you've already stepped into his world. Angus is not just a musician. He is an embodiment of unwavering loyalty to music, the eternal engine of AC/DC, one of the greatest rock bands of all time. While others changed their style, their sound, chasing trends, he chose to stay true to himself. One SG guitar, one schoolboy uniform, and a passion that never compromised. But behind those furious riffs lies a far more complex life. A childhood in poverty in Glasgow, years spent drifting with unknown bands, the loss of his brother, the lifelong companion of his career, and a private life marked by silence and solitude in stark contrast to what he brings on stage. This is the story of Angus Young, the smallest man in rock, yet perhaps the one who made it roar the longest. Early life. Angus MacKinnon Young was born on March 31st, 1955 in Glasgow, Scotland, a bleak industrial city, where children grew up among coal smoke, shuttered factories, and fog-drenched streets. His family lived at 6 Scary Road in the Cranhill district, a working-class area marked by high unemployment, schoolyard violence, and the need for kids to toughen up early if they didn't want to get crushed. Angus was the youngest of 8 siblings. His father, William Young, had served in the Royal Air Force during World War II before taking on various labor jobs to support the family, from factory worker to asbestos cutter to postman. His mother, Margaret, a strong Jewish woman, devoted herself to raising their children in a tiny house with no heater, no fridge, and often only one full meal a day. Life was hard, but music was never absent from their home. Angus' older brothers, Stephen, Alexander, George, and Malcolm, all played music. Alexander pursued a performing career in Europe. George became a successful producer and member of the Easy Beats, while Malcolm, who would later co-found AC/DC with Angus, was his closest musical companion. The first instrument Angus ever touched wasn't guitar. It was an old banjo that George had restrung to help his little brother get started with music. Later, their mother scraped together enough to buy Angus a battered acoustic guitar. Not because they had extra money, but because they knew music was the only way the children in that house could dream of a different life. Angus never had formal music lessons. A single session with his brother Alexander was all the instruction he ever got. From there, he taught himself by ear, by hand, by obsession, spending hours in his tiny bedroom practicing every chord, every riff, until his fingers bled. In a noisy, cold world, the guitar became his only refuge. In 1963, when Angus was 8, the Young family decided to immigrate to Australia, a move driven by survival. That year, Glasgow endured its harshest winter in history, and television ads began encouraging poor families to move to the Southern Hemisphere for a new life. The Youngs took that chance like a roll of the dice. They arrived in Sydney after a long flight, with little more than a few suitcases and fragile hope. The family was temporarily housed in Villawood Migrant Hostel, a steel barrack-style settlement that would later become a detention center for illegal immigrants. They lived in cramped metal huts, sweltering in summer, freezing in winter, sharing toilets and kitchens with dozens of other families. Yet again, music became their salvation. George Young, Angus' older brother, befriended Harry Vanda, a Dutch migrant also living in Villawood, and together they formed the Easy Beats, Australia's first major rock band of that era. George's success ignited a powerful spark in his younger siblings, especially Malcolm and Angus, quiet, reserved boys who transformed completely when holding a guitar. The family later moved to Burleigh Street in Burwood, a suburb of Sydney. Angus attended Burwood Primary School, then Ashfield Boys High School, but school never suited him. Apart from art class, he felt out of place in every subject. At 15, Angus dropped out and entered the adult world with a few bucks earned from printing jobs and an unshaped dream of music. Then, in that small bedroom, his first second-hand Gibson SG appeared, bought from a nearby music store. Angus would later call it his life partner. And from that moment on, he never walked away from music again. Early career. When Angus Young dropped out of school at 15, he had no diploma, no direction, and no one to guide him into music. But he did have an old SG guitar, a few years of makeshift banjo playing, and most importantly, an obsession with sound. He worked night shifts at a slaughterhouse, set type at a printing press, and was even the subject of bizarre rumor that he once worked for an adult magazine, something Angus later denied with a hint of irritation. I only printed letters, not people. But even through those exhausting days, he devoted every night to the guitar, tinkering with tones, forging a sound of his own, tight, punchy riffs that hit like a hammer on steel. In the early 1970s, Angus began performing with small bands like Kentucky, a local rock group with a rotating lineup. The band soon changed its name to Tantrum, with Angus on lead guitar alongside members like Bob McGlynn, Trevor James, and Mark Sneddon. Though the group never gained fame, it was where Angus honed his stage presence, learning how to lead a band with rhythm, eye contact, and raw energy. But the real turning point came when Angus and his brother Malcolm joined the Marcus Hook Roll Band, a short-lived but pivotal project with George Young and Harry Vanda. They recorded the album Tales of Old Granddaddy, a commercial flop, but opened the first real door to professional music world for the Young brothers. Then one night in 1973, Malcolm suggested they form a new band. Angus agreed without hesitation. The name AC/DC, spotted by their sister Margaret on the back of a sewing machine, was chosen because it represented power, electricity, and nonstop energy, and fittingly so, since none of them knew they were about to create one of the most explosive bands in rock history. At that time, Angus had no iconic image. He experimented with costumes on stage. Sometimes Spider-Man, other times a cowboy, or even a spoof superhero called Super Ong. But then Margaret came up with a bizarre idea. Why not wear a school uniform? And so he did, at first just to get attention, but no one could have predicted that the outfit would become his lifelong trademark. A child who never grew up, wielding a guitar like he was channeling a lightning storm. AC/DC's first song, Can I Sit Next to You Girl, was recorded with vocalist Dave Evans, but it failed to make a lasting impression. Only when Bon Scott joined the band did things truly ignite. His raspy voice and rebellious spirit gave AC/DC its true identity. At that point, Angus, armed with his old Gibson SG, schoolboy uniform, Chuck Berry, style duckwalk, and electrifying playing, became an irreplaceable force on stage. In 1975, AC/DC released their debut album High Voltage in Australia. No one could have imagined that a record made by immigrant kids playing crude riffs, gritty sounds, and shouting reckless lyrics would be the first shot fired in a global rock revolution. From a 6-string banjo to High Voltage, from a small bedroom in Burwood to packed concert halls, Angus Young had taken his first steps soaked in sweat and determination on the road to becoming one of rock and roll's living legends. Career success. AC/DC was never a band made to please the radio. They didn't write ballads, no love songs, no layer harmonies. All they had were guitars, drums, a voice like a revving engine, and a little whirlwind named Angus Young. From High Voltage 1975, their debut release in Australia, to TNT and Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, AC/DC kept pushing the limits of hard rock with a formula that sounded simple, very few chords, but an abundance of energy. In an era where many bands were chasing musical complexity, AC/DC chose rawness and instinct, and that paradoxically became their unmistakable identity. In 1976, AC/DC signed with Atlantic Records, a major step toward global exposure. But at first the label wasn't impressed with their tonally poor and too loud sound. Some executives called High Voltage chaotic and unsellable. If it hadn't been for producer Phil Carson, who took a chance on instinct, AC/DC might have been buried early on. Then came Let There Be Rock, 1977, and Powerage, 1978. With Let There Be Rock, they turned religion into a rock metaphor. And the man said, let there be sound. And there was sound. With Powerage, they elevated rebellion, not in punk's gloom or prog rock's elegance, but with pounding rhythms, violent tones, and a middle finger attitude. Across all those albums, Angus Young was a defining force. While Malcolm laid a foundation as solid as concrete, Angus was a spark. Unpredictable, scorching, and explosive. He was a screaming soul of a well-oiled machine. Highway to Hell, 1979, marked AC/DC's breakthrough. Produced by Robert Mutt Lang, known for his precision and relentless studio demands, the band was pushed to play each part dozens of times until it was razor sharp, something they had never experienced before. The result, a classic, every guitar tone. In Girls Got Rhythm, Shot Down in Flames, and If You Want Blood, felt like it could blow out your speakers. And Highway to Hell, the title track, became an immortal anthem of modern rock and roll. But with every peak comes the risk of a fall. On February 19, 1980, Bon Scott, the band's wild, instinctive frontman, died after a night of heavy drinking. Passing out in a car in London, it wasn't just a death. It was a gash to the band's soul. Angus was devastated. He didn't speak to the press. No statements. He just vanished for a while, as if he had lost a part of himself. AC/DC stood at crossroads. Disband or be reborn. They chose the latter, not for commercial reasons, but for Bon. Malcolm famously said, "Bon would have wanted us to go on." Angus and the band recruited Brian Johnson, a vocalist from the band Geordie, whose metallic voice could scream like thunder but still carry enough emotion to turn simple lyrics into bullets straight to the brain. They entered the studio in the Bahamas. It was storming outside, thunder, lightning, and Angus said, "That's Bon opening the show from hell." Back in Black was born as a funeral album. Black cover, no images, no gimmicks. But inside, it was the greatest farewell ever made for a fallen bandmate. Hell's Bells began with a tolling bell and riffs heavy as iron. You Shook Me All Night Long blended seduction with explosive energy. Shoot to Thrill was a high-speed bullet. And Back in Black, with its tight, aggressive riff, became a monument in music history. Back in Black sold over 50 million copies, becoming the second best-selling album of all time, only behind Michael Jackson's Thriller. The 1980s and 1990s saw new trends emerge, glam metal, grunge, industrial rock, but AC/DC never followed. They released those about Iraq, 1981, Fly on the Wall, 1985, and The Razor's Edge, 1990, all staying true to their philosophy, tight, hard, no frills, no pandering. The media often accuse them of repeating themselves, but Angus delivered one of rock's most legendary comebacks. They say we've made 11 albums that all sound the same. That's wrong. We've made 12. Angus Young still wore the schoolboy uniform, still wielded the Gibson SG, still duck-walked like a kid skipping class chasing a lightning bolt. While the world changed, he stood still, and people kept turning to look. After 8 years of silence, AC/DC returned in 2008 with Black Ice, an album that topped charts in 29 countries. The tour grossed over $440 million, making it one of the most successful tours in music history. Rock or Bust, 2014, was released under a shadow of loss. Malcolm had been diagnosed with dementia and had to leave the band. But Angus carried on, this time as the last standing warrior leading the band forward. Angus Young never chased glory. He dragged it behind him. For over half a century, he never changed his style, never changed his stance, never changed his sound, and somehow that made him more enduring than anyone else. Tragedy, Malcolm's death, and the unspoken grief. Malcolm Young was never the man at center stage. He wasn't the face on the album covers. He wasn't the voice that kicked off each concert. But to Angus, Malcolm was a heart, the one who laid the foundation for every riff, every arrangement, every drum beat of AC/DC. They didn't need to speak much. A single glance was enough to know what the other was playing, thinking, feeling. On stage, amidst blinding lights and the roar of tens of thousands, the two brothers could change chords with nothing more than a nod. Angus once said, I don't care what the audience thinks. I just look at Malcolm. If he nods, I know I'm doing it right. In 2014, everything started to crack. Malcolm, the eldest brother, co-founder of the band, began to forget lyrics, chords, even the things that had once been part of his very body. The diagnosis came. Early onset dementia, a cruel disease that not only erases memories but slowly steals the very essence of a person. Angus saw it all, day by day, hour by hour, and that was the hardest part. It wasn't the death that hurt most. It was a gradual disappearance of the brother I once knew. Malcolm stepped away from the band. His nephew Stevie Young was brought in, not because he matched Malcolm's technique, but because he was family. But everyone knew no one could replace Malcolm. Angus kept touring, still played the guitar, still wore the schoolboy uniform, and duck-walked across the stage. But off-stage, he grew quieter, avoided the press, and rarely mentioned Malcolm, not out of coldness, but because there were no words big enough to hold that kind of loss. Malcolm passed away on November 18th, 2017, at the age of 64, quietly, without a media frenzy, just a simple, solemn announcement from the family and the band. Angus didn't give a lengthy tribute. In a single rare interview, he said one sentence that left everyone silent. Losing Malcolm, it felt like I lost an arm. But Angus didn't let that tragedy swallow AC/DC. In 2020, he gathered the remaining members, Brian Johnson, Phil Rudd, Cliff Williams, all of whom had at one point seemingly left for good. Together, they recorded a new album called Power Up, not as a new beginning, but as a final tribute to Malcolm. The song, Through the Mist of Time, was written like a letter. It never names anyone directly, but every lyric, every image feels like a quiet call for the fog of memory. See your shadow in the night / feel your spirit in the air / walk with me through the mist of time. In every note, Angus was still speaking. To Malcolm, even if the world could no longer hear his brother's voice. In an industry filled with scandals and noise, the bond between the young brothers was something rare. No theatrics, no vows, just a quiet devotion that lasted to the very end. Angus never tried to become an icon, but through his wordless pain, his quiet loyalty, and the dignified silence he maintained through loss, he became something irreplaceable in rock, a younger brother who plays to keep the soul of his fallen brother alive. Personal life. On stage, Angus Young is a whirlwind running wild, duck walking on his thin legs, swinging his SG like he's pulling lightning from the air. But when the lights go out, the applause fades, and the guitar is unplugged, he doesn't retreat to lavish hotels, throw parties, or seek the spotlight. He disappears into the shadows, returning to his true self, a quiet, introverted man who prefers being at home, utterly unlike the image of a global rock star. Angus married Ellen van Lochem, a Dutch woman, in 1980 right in the midst of AC/DC's first major peak. They met through a mutual friend in Europe. No scandals, no romantic declarations in the media. Just a simple connection, and they've stayed together for over 40 years. The couple has no children, doesn't appear on red carpets, and doesn't share private photos. Ellen chooses to remain out of the spotlight, and Angus respects that completely. To him, real love doesn't need to be displayed to be real. They divide their time among 3 homes, a villa in Kangaroo Point, Sydney, a large house in Alton, the Netherlands, Ellen's hometown, and a quiet apartment in Glasgow where Angus grew up. Each place is designed with privacy in mind, not flashy, but secluded enough for him to withdraw from the world when not on tour. The house in Alton, personally designed by the couple, has a private studio, a reading room, a wide garden, and a wine cellar that's completely empty because Angus doesn't drink. Despite being the face of one of the coolest bands in rock history, Angus is someone who's never touched alcohol. While his bandmates struggle with accidents, rehab, and being kicked off tours, he's stuck with chocolate milk and tea. The only thing he's ever been addicted to is cigarettes, something he's never been able to quit. Angus doesn't drive much either, even though he owns an impressive collection of vintage cars, a 1930s Bentley 4.5L, a Ferrari 458 Italia, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, a Ford Model 48, each one steeped in history and symbolism just like him. But offstage, Angus avoids attention. He's not on social media. He dislikes interviews. He doesn't do talk shows. He lives quietly, as if half of his life exists only behind the curtains. He enjoys oil painting, loves jazz, especially Louis Armstrong. In his private room, among family photos, sits his first SG guitar, worn, darkened, warped from sweaty palms, but never locked away in a display case. To Angus, success isn't about the number of tours, awards, or fans. Success is being able to live true to yourself without having to explain it to anyone. And so while the world may see him as an icon, he still sees himself as a kid who never grew up, still wearing a school uniform, playing loud music with my brother. In an era where most artists need constant visibility to avoid being forgotten, Angus Young chose the opposite path. The quieter he is, the more unforgettable he becomes. The less he tries to hold on to fame, the more the world refuses to let him go. Current life and legacy. At 69, Angus Young still isn't resting. No memoir, no retirement announcement, no selling music rights for a comfortable pension. Instead, he keeps going, picking up his Gibson SG, putting on that time-worn schoolboy uniform, and running as if racing against the years he has left. In 2024, Angus returned with AC/DC for the Power Up Tour, their first since 2016, following years of loss and disruption. Leading a reunited lineup of Brian Johnson, Phil Rudd, Cliff Williams, and Stevie Young, Angus remained the irreplaceable core. They played Wembley, Croke Park, Berlin, and Rome before tens of thousands of fans. Both those who had seen them since High Voltage and younger listeners raised on Spotify playlists who still recognize the opening riff of Back in Black. On stage, Angus doesn't say much. No shouting, no speeches. He lets the guitar speak. And as always, his SG still sounds like thunder. Tight, powerful, uncompromising. On March 31st, 2025, he reached a new milestone, 70. But there was no loud party, no media tribute, nostalgic speech. Instead, he appeared on stage in Minneapolis, USA, for the opening show of the 2025 Power Up Tour. Still the same Angus, still the faded school uniform, still the old SG, still duck-walking like time never caught up to him. That same year, AC/DC continued their North American leg of the Power Up Tour, hitting iconic cities like Arlington, Nashville, and Pasadena before heading to Europe in June for shows in Prague, Berlin, Madrid, Paris, and closing the tour in Edinburgh, Scotland, the ancestral home of the Young family. Despite being 70, Angus still played full 2-hour sets each night. No breaks, no slowing down. He remained the fire guiding a band that had lost many of its original brothers, now performing with newer faces like Matt Logg on drums and Chris Chaney on bass, alongside familiar names, Brian Johnson, fresh off hearing treatment, and Stevie Young, Malcolm's nephew, on rhythm guitar. But when the lights dim, he steps back again, still living in Sydney and Alton, still off social media, still absent from talk shows. People only know he's still around through grainy backstage clips and fleeting live footage. And yet his absence only makes his presence louder. Angus Young is one of the few artists who never left the band he founded. For 51 years, he's had no solo career, no side projects, no redefining himself. He is the embodiment of consistency. Same style, same philosophy, same speed, same passion, regardless of how many times the world has changed. His legacy isn't measured in awards. Though AC/DC was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2003, ranked 72 on Rolling Stone's list of the greatest artists of all time, and dubbed the fourth greatest hard rock band ever by VH1, Angus was never one to chase titles. To him, the greatest achievement is that people are still playing his riffs in garages, bedrooms, and tiny stages all around the world. Angus was never a wizard guitarist. He doesn't play 40-note per second solos, doesn't flaunt scales or complicated variations, but he knows how to make 3 chords explode. He made students, laborers, unknown musicians, and legendary rockers alike feel like they could pick up a guitar and roar like he does. That's real power, bringing rock down from the temples back into the streets, from idol to flesh and blood today. While many legends have retired, passed on, or quietly faded into the shadows, Angus Young still stands, still plays, and still looks in the crowd of thousands as if he's on his very first tour. He doesn't need media to remind us of his name because he was never forgotten. He doesn't need his legacy rewritten because he never stopped writing it. Angus Young never needed to become a legend. He just wanted to play music. But it's precisely because all he ever wanted was to play that he became a living legend, naturally and without ever having to say so. For over 50 years, he never left his band, never changed his style, never needed to be reminded to be remembered. While the world kept shifting, while many artists who were once icons faded into background, Angus Young kept putting on his schoolboy uniform, kept duck-walking across every stage, and kept playing the riffs that made millions rise to their feet. He's a heartbeat of an era that's slowly fading. Not through speeches, but through his guitar. Simple, raw, and full of fire. And that's exactly what makes him more timeless than any greatness built on headlines and hype. In a world where rock has lost much of its wildness and sincerity, Angus Young is proof that sometimes it's not the loudest voices that leave the deepest echo. Maybe one day he'll step off the stage for good. But until then, and likely long after, his riffs will still ring out in teenagers' garages, in the headphones of lonely souls, in the hearts of those who are no longer young but have never really grown old. Because Angus doesn't just play guitar. He keeps the fire of rock and roll alive when the rest of the world has almost forgotten what it felt like to burn. And what about you? Have you ever listened to Back in Black on a sleepless night, tried to copy Angus's duck walk in a cramped dorm room, or felt your heart pounded with every fierce riff he played? If so, leave us a comment below. Tell us about the moment Angus Young entered your life, and when you realized that it wasn't you who chose rock, but rock that chose you. And if you believe the flame of rock still burns, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who's ever loved the guitar, loved AC/DC, or just loved what it feels like to live through music.